In 1612, 16 women and 4 men were committed for trial on charges of killing or severely injuring various persons by means of witchcraft. This was Lancashire, England, and King James I was on the throne. It was the age of witch-finding and devil-hunting. Reels of witness testimonies and confessions were recorded, with the accused being associated with all manner of devilry, from blood pacts to shape-shifting to magical flight to infanticide. Ultimately, the charges against 8 were dropped. A 9th received a reduced sentence of 4 days pillorying, and another, an elderly woman, perished in prison. The remaining 10 were hanged. They would forevermore be known as the Pendle Witches. Such is a dark entry in the history of Lancashire, a county of northwest England which was, at the end of the 16th century, regarded as a savage and lawless region, fabled for its theft, violence and sexual laxity, where the church was honoured without much understanding of its doctrines by the common people. It made sense then that devilry would spring from its remote hills and untamed wilderness. And certainly, despite the development of time and civility, such a belief did not fade, for less than 100 years later, another, a woman by the name of Mag Shelton, was accused of similar acts of witchcraft. She, however, unlike those who fell before her, did not face trial. Shunned and scorned, she was, in many ways, too feared by those whom she lived amongst for them to act against her. Such meant that when she died in 1705, her neighbours feared her still. And so they buried her, stuffed head first into a thin shaft, beneath a great boulder, a witch's stone, a tremendous weight which, they hoped, would contain her. For Mag, it was said, not merely committed dark deeds during life, but longed, and longs still, to leave her grave, determined in death to defend her title as the Hag of the Fylde, the last of the Lancashire witches. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. In 1867, John Harland and T.T. Wilkinson published Lancashire Folklore, a text described as illustrative of the superstitious beliefs and practices of the people of the county. Within its pages is a brief reference to the village of Singleton and a woman called Mag Shelton. Many stories, we are told, relate to her dealings in the black art, for in her day she was known as a famous witch. In particular, the authors mention her alleged ability to transform everyday objects, including milk pitchers, into living animals. She would, so it was reported, steal milk from her neighbours' cows, with the pitcher in which she conveyed the stolen milk away walking before her in the shape of a goose. Under this disguise, her depredations were carried on till a neighbour, suspecting the trick, struck the seeming goose, and lo, immediately it was changed into a broken pitcher, the milk thus being spilt everywhere. Little more is said than this, the collection quickly turning to other tales of strangeness. It is hinted, however, that there are many more wild tales to be found about Singleton's resident witch, with her appearing in other local texts of the time, including Reverend William Thornbur's 1837 The History of Blackpool and its Neighbourhood. For certainly Mag, or Meg as she is equally known, has been embedded into the oral history of the Fylde, the coastal plain which runs inland from Lancashire's Fylde coast. Not merely that, she has been embedded into its very earth. After all, a visit to the Fylde village of Woodplumpton, in particular the graveyard of St. Anne's Church, reveals something truly peculiar. A large boulder, lichen-covered and sunk into the grass, labelled with a small metal sign. Beneath this stone, so it reads, lie the remains of Meg Shelton, Witch of Woodplumpton, buried in 1705. The stone, so local legend tells us, was placed over her so as to keep her in her grave, for when she died, found in her cottage, crushed between a heavy oak barrel and a stone wall, it was feared that she was not truly dead. The devil, it was whispered, would help her to rise from her grave. And certainly, if the rumours are to be believed, she did this not merely once, but multiple times. The morning after her burial, her grave was discovered disturbed, the corpse of Mag beside it, lying on the open grass. She was immediately reburied, but was found the same the next morning, and the morning afterwards, and so on until local people placed a large boulder over her grave to stop what they could only assume had been her digging her way out. Not only that, they buried her head first, and in a thin shaft. Thus, if she tried to dig her way out again, she would find herself digging in the wrong direction. And so Mag Shelton, in spite of the physical evidence that is her grave, appears a woman more myth than real. Physically, we know that she existed, but what of the actual person? Were local people justified in fearing her as they did, as a woman indebted to the devil and therefore able to wield immense paranormal power? According to Walks in Mysterious Lancashire, a 1999 book written by the travel writer Graham K. Dugdale, Mag Shelton's real name was Marjorie Hilton, a woman born in the 17th century who, despite being associated with the villages of Singleton and Woodplumpton, lived between the two in Cuthbert. Originally from Wesham and a place called Cuckoo Cottage, she is said to have moved to Cuthbert under strange circumstances, by making a bet with the landlord of the cottage she wished to rent. Local legend states she wagered the man that she could transform into a hare and thus win a race against his dogs. If she won, the cottage would be hers. Her only condition was that the landlord was not allowed to release his prized hound, a large black dog of incredible speed, for Mag feared it was too dangerous for her to compete against. The landlord, however, had no intention of losing his property to a witch, and so released the animal anyway. The dog bit Mag on her hind leg just as she got through the door of the cottage. When she transformed back into a woman, she retained the injury, thus explaining both how Mag arrived in Cuthbert and how she came about the limp which she suffered the rest of her life. Thus, Mag Shelton, or Marjorie Hilton, was established in the local area as a witch. Another legend associated with Mag involves a farmer who suspected her of stealing his food. He had supposedly seen her, but never been able to catch her sneaking into his mill so as to pilfer his sacks of corn. One day, upon noticing that he had one sack more than he was supposed to, the farmer reached for his pitchfork and stabbed each sack in turn. When he pierced one, it let out a scream. It was Mag. By now well established as being able to shapeshift, it was said she had transformed herself into a sack so as to hide from the farmer. Injured, she transformed back to her normal self and fled the scene. And so another injury acquired in the course of witchcraft. By the time of her death in 1705, Mag had, through her misdeeds in life, gained a tremendous reputation. Even so, she was allowed to be buried within the consecrated ground of St. Anne's churchyard, having never been formally tried as a witch during her lifetime. Regardless, local people knew otherwise. Mag must have been a witch. There were simply too many strange stories. Combine that with how she appeared to rise from her grave each night after her burial, and there was no disputing it. It is even said that people feared her post-mortem influence so strongly that a priest was called to perform an exorcism at her grave. Some 130 years later, when William Thornber published his history of the local area, people were still talking of her. Such a legacy continued and takes us right to the present day. For indeed, Mag Shelton's witchcraft was not ended by the boulder placed atop her grave. Testimonies provided by local people as recently as 2019 report strange happenings, including odd sounds and apparitions at her gravesite. One, dating to 2005, describes how a man called Josh Burrows saw a ghastly blue figure standing beside the church as he stooped to retie his shoelaces in the graveyard. Another comment, left by a lady called Elaine on a BBC article about the legend of the Woodplumpton witch, even sensationally alleges that when driving around that corner close to the church, she lost control of her car for no reason. This near-deadly incident was attributed to Mag, whom Elaine believed still had the power that she was described as possessing during life. Someone else who has claimed a near-death experience provoked by Mag is a local man called Bill Clayton. Sharing his story online, he detailed how, as a boy, he and his father went metal detecting in a field just down from the church, where it is said the ruins of Mag's old house remain. Little more than a few stones at the time of their visit, his father nonetheless discovered a lead idol of a figure on a cross amongst the rocks and overgrowth. It was, so Clayton recalled, weather-worn, with the features on the character's face all twisted. When his father brought the artifact home, his mother was so horrified at the sight of it that she would not allow it in the house. The spooky thing was, Clayton writes, that at the moment my father found the idol, I fell in the adjacent brook and nearly drowned that day. Equally haunting is a story described as dating to the 1920s. A family was visiting the church at Woodplumpton when their young son ran ahead and into the building. He soon raced back to his parents, however, screaming that he had seen an old woman dressed in strange old-fashioned clothing. She had, so the little boy supposedly claimed, chased him away and out of the church. Everyone who afterwards heard the story knew who the old woman was, Mag, the Fylde witch. Today there are several local superstitions which have grown from such tales. One states that in order to keep Mag in her grave, you must run around her boulder 3 times, then spit onto it. Another, more commonly told, is how if you walk around the grave 3 times and then declare, "I don't believe in witches," the witch's hand will appear and grab your leg. Another, again, passed down from generation to generation, even suggests that the devil will appear, spotted through the keyhole of the church door, if you circle the grave 3 times, then stand on the stone. In this way, it is impossible to dispute Mag Shelton's authority, if not as a witch, then as a figure of cultural significance. Such is what Dugdale, when writing about his walks in mysterious Lancashire, referred to as Mag's mesmeric influence over the present. At the time of his writing in the 1990s, fresh flowers were a common sight at her grave. They are likewise left today. As, after all, Mag and her story have attracted much sympathy. In his article, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches Unearthing the Occult, Necromancy and Magic in 17th Century England, the University of Cambridge historian and archaeologist David Barraclough relates how historical sources have not merely confirmed Mag's existence, but also her crippled condition and poverty. Accused of the theft of basic staples from her neighbours, she appears in the records as an elderly woman struggling to survive on her own. That she was different, unmarried and disabled, both physically and financially, meant, so Barraclough concludes, that she was determined a witch by her local community. She was not one of them, and so she must have been one of the devils. Similar accounts of impoverished elderly women being pushed outside of their communities and branded witches appear elsewhere. According to a rare 17th century tract on the Lancashire witches, an old woman known as Mother Cuthbert, who lived in a little hovel at the bottom of Lancashire's infamous Pendle Hill, one day entered into the Society of Witches, after being gifted a purse of money by a shape-shifting man-dog rabbit. The witches, so the tract informs us, gathered in a dark and magical forest so as to dance together and revel in their witchcraft. Familiars in the shapes of cats, bears and apes were summoned to dance alongside the women at the command of their matron's wand striking the ground. This woman, called Mother Crady, promised Mother Cuthbert that she would always be so merry if she embraced their sisterhood. Thus, anointed and presented with an imp, she was told she would be able to wield power as such as she had never known before. A tremendous backstory to a tale which very quickly looks less impressive. After all, one of Mother Cuthbert's witchy exploits involves her being whipped after taking the Mayor of Lancashire's pails to make her fire in the cold of winter. For this, she supposedly took her revenge, casting a spell by way of a letter slipped into the mayor's hand, forcing him to run a race. He stripped himself stark naked and ran, bewitched, through the street with a whip in hand, lashing his sides and back, crying, "There he goes! I win! I win!" It is said that he ran on to the further end of the town, lashing himself till he was bloody, entirely unaware of what he was doing, until he stopped and found himself dripping in his own blood. It was Mother Cuthbert's doing, of that the town was certain. Of course, they overlooked the basic question. If the old woman was capable of such dastardly magic to get her revenge, why hadn't she used the same powers to start a fire, and thus save herself from needing to seek vengeance in the first place? Just as Mag Shelton was deemed a witch for having stolen milk and corn to feed herself, so Mother Cuthbert was accused of devilry for stealing firewood to keep herself warm. Given that all of this occurred against the backdrop of the growing reverence of the Protestant work ethic, the belief that God helps those diligent, disciplined and frugal who work hard and thus help themselves, that two old women had very little in terms of material wealth so as to demonstrate their piety, can be said to have done little to endear them to their neighbours. And so we return to our earlier question. Were local people justified in fearing Mag Shelton as a witch? The answer, in all honesty, is most likely no. Like so many other cases of witches from the 17th and 18th centuries, hysteria and superstition abounds. After all, as William Thornber wrote in his 1837 book, every mishap was ascribed to the ill nature of the witch. The cow or horse that died of old age was bewitched. In this way, what we can be grateful for here at least is that the people of Woodplumpton waited until after Mag died before subjecting her to their ritual judgment by means of burying her head first under a rock. But if the witchery is false, then what of the tales afterwards? The hauntings, the blue spectral woman, the bedeviled boulder belonging to the hag of the Fylde. Might it be that Mag Shelton can still be counted amongst the restless dead? After all, witch or otherwise, there is much unfinished business associated with her name, most especially the need to tend to the true curse of the hag, that those who are different and struggling and quite possibly very lonely indeed are often cursed to suffer the misplaced judgments of those around them. Thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this video, and an extra special thank you to our members, both here on YouTube and on Patreon, for helping to support the work that we do. You are very much appreciated. Finally, if you cannot wait for my next video, why not watch another as suggested on screen now? Until next time,